A few words of introduction before we start the presentation. Since this is the first session in which some of the new people are here, because I know that many people were there in the previous workshop, so you already know the processes that we follow. But for the people who are new, we need to give a few instructions. Our intent in these sessions, there are going to be 4 sessions. This forenoon session, an afternoon session today, a forenoon session tomorrow, and an afternoon session tomorrow. In these 4 sessions, we are going to have presentations by the participants on my lectures. That means you are going to listen to my lectures and you are going to present them. Present them as if you are teaching the same material to a class. And you must pretend that all of us are students and you are presenting it to a group of students. Of course, you must also keep in mind that you are expected to reflect the pedagogical perspective which my lectures give you in the course. Adding on, of course, anything else that you might feel is relevant to those lectures. Having said that, we also want to leave a little bit of time for discussion. We want to discuss each of the presentations a little bit, and now the material, as I said, is a little more difficult, so probably a little more discussion will be required. So therefore, I'm not going to hurry people up at all in the presentation. At the same time, you must keep in mind that there are other people waiting to present, so you must do a reasonable job. You see, today we have scheduled 12 presentations, but we may not be able to finish all of them, but we should definitely try and finish at least 9 or 10 today. We should try to finish 9 or 10 today at least. Maybe, 9 or 10 might just be right, probably. And when you're presenting the lecture, you must present particular pedagogical points about teaching and learning that you might find important in that lecture, which you might want to convey to a class. Anyway, so, as we go along, we'll understand the process better. So therefore, now I'm very happy to welcome group 1 to make its presentation.
And regarding sampling, there are many things in minds of many individuals, especially the student community. And the sampling theorem is also discussed in another subject, that is communication. And it depends whether which sequence comes first, whether signals and systems comes first or the communication system comes first. So from that aspect, the sequence changes and student might carry some perception which is not so easy to understand. So if we go by sampling theorem, then the band limited signal, band unlimited signal, and sampling at the rate of twice the maximum frequency. So in that context, when we apply that to real time processes, then essentially we do not have a time unlimited signal to sample with. So it is essentially time limited signal, so band unlimited, and sampling theorem in practical purposes never works. So reconstruction, and also reconstruction based on sampling theorem by convolving the pulses and all that, impulse responses, is something what I feel is a bit difficult to understand. Therefore, based on the first lecture which I watched it many times, so I again watched it today to get acquainted with the minute details. So a simpler version of explaining sampling process, especially if we consider Professor Gadre's lecture majoritarily take into account the student community who are IIT students. So for them, band limited, band unlimited, time unlimited is somewhat in their perception domain. But for when we talk of state engineering colleges and a student community at large, I want to add something. It's not it's a very bold word to say that I'm adding something in Professor Gadre's lecture, but what I what we can say, modify my word, that I would like to make it more simple for the audience to understand. So what I feel is that we should be, first of all, taking a signal which is time on x-axis and signal on y-axis, that we simply say that is V in t, we draw by a blue line, a general given signal. Then we apply a sample and hold circuit first, and we sample it at a regular intervals, which we can see at the from A to B. I have put the sampling process, and we sample it at regular intervals, and after sampling at regular intervals, we draw the signal which is reconstructed from sample and hold circuit. Remember, the sample points we cannot connect to each other, because the next is not that is the next sampling point is not the information available to sample and hold circuit when it is being sampled. And then after we plot the reconstructed signal based on sample and hold signal circuit, that is plotted with a black ink. The blue signal is original signal, and black signal is reconstructed using sample and hold signal. Then for simpler understanding of an average student, what we define is what the theme today in today's discussion is what we lose in the sampling process, and whether that loss is a negligible loss or substantial loss. So from that point of view, we define an error signal, say ERRT, which is the difference between the blue line and blue signal and black signal. Then sometimes blue is more, sometimes black is more, as we can see at various intervals. Therefore, we to have a measure of the overall error, we find RMS error. By integrating error signal by squaring it over a time interval from A to B, so we get the ERMS. Then whether that is more or less, that will tell us whether sampling is completely lossless or lossy but with negligible loss, or substantial loss is there. For that we define a relative error. So in relative error, we define this ERMS upon ES, where ES is RMS value of the original signal itself. So ES is original signal, it's a squared integral and square root taken upon B minus A. So relative error is ERMS upon ES, that is RMS value of error upon RMS value of signal. So that is one figure of merit, but that may be somewhat elusive, because if we are having in between samples, there is a very huge difference at small time interval. So that is, we can have maximum error. Emax also we can find. Emax we can find by simply maximum of modulus of error signal, and that we can define by RMS of, that we can divide by RMS of original signal. So both relative figures, that is the ERMS and Emax, will tell us whether I have defined the figures of merit. These will tell us whether the sampling process what we have carried out is perfect. That is, if I have a DC signal, in that case it will be perfect reconstruction. Otherwise, whether it is perfect or negligible loss, that I can very well see, that we can show the students by increasing the sampling time, the error increases, decreasing the sampling time, error decreases, and we can take a ratio of ERMS upon ES, Emax ERMS upon ES, and maximum error signal upon ES. So we get two figures of merit. That is, I made a small mistake, that ERMS is not a relative figure of merit, but relative error, that is ERMS upon ES. So error RMS upon RMS of signal that is relative error signal and maximum error signal, relative maximum error signal. Based on these two, what I think is for an average student to understand the sampling process and tell him that yes, the signal reconstruction will be better if these two figures are less. You can have if these figure the 1%, 10%, 5%, 0.1%, like that. If we take and show with an example, I think that the sampling process would be better understood by the students rather than sampling theorem, because sampling theorem is of more abstract, and when we take a real-time example, the sampling theorem can never be satisfied. So that's what the simplification for these state engineering college students is required in the first session, is my perception. One may or may not agree. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Professor Marathe. It's a very interesting presentation. There are a few remarks I had. I'm not very sure if this presentation was reflective of the first lecture that I had given there in the course. I mean, other people may want to comment on that also. I'm not sure if this presentation was aligned to the first lecture which I had given in the course. It might be to some extent, but you know, the idea, actually, I agree with you that one needs to approach sampling from a very basic perspective. But I must also caution you against looking down upon students from one institution or another. We must be careful. You know, see, the thing is, we have, of course, it is true that IIT has very good students, but you know, we don't know the potential of students in other places. So very often, if we underestimate, see, very often people become what we call them. You know, so if you call a person intelligent, the person slowly starts becoming intelligent. If you call a person stupid, the person slowly starts becoming stupid. So people often assume the identity that we give them. So we must make it a practice to tell our students wherever we are that you are very capable. So we should not say that you are state engineering college students, you are IIT students, so, you know, you can't understand as much as I. That's not, you see, we must make it a point to convince our students that our students are capable wherever they are, whether they are in a state engineering college or in a private engineering college or in IIT or in MIT or wherever. So our as teachers, my view is that we should always make it a practice to let our students know that they are very capable, and let our students know that any human being uses only about 10% of his or her intellectual potential all through his or her life. So that means no person really uses even 10% of his or her intellectual potential all through his or her life, which means that, you know, the question of somebody being much more capable inherently is only marginal. That's only marginal. Right? So it's very important that as teachers we take this view and we tell our students that you are very capable and you should try to achieve your, you know, your potential as much as you can. The other observation I have is that in this presentation, I would like to see a little more discussion on the question, the fundamental question of sampling. The errors come later. I don't really know if I had talked about squared error and so on in that lecture. I might have, but my feeling is that, you know, what is the fundamental problem in sampling? What is it that sampling demands? See, band limitedness and so on comes later, right? But what is it that sampling demands? What is the issue that comes up when one samples? Is what I would have liked to hear in this presentation. And when you make a presentation in front of us, you know, when you introduce the topic of sampling to a student audience, it's very important first to say what sampling means, explain what challenges sampling poses, and then move on to the technical details, right? So these are my observations on the presentation. I would like to hear observations from other participants.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yes, a very good morning to you.
So this is Rakesh Sharma from PSG College of Technology.
Sure.
Sir, I would like to say that Understanding, sir has presented about formula, given a formula EB by ES. I guess this is similar to DSBST modulation index.
Yes.
DSBST modulation index, they will study in third year of their BE, sir, analog
Yes.
communication. But these signals comes prior to the analog communication.
Yes. Yes.
So they may not be knowing these formulas prior. You can derive and you can show that this is way you can achieve this, but this understanding comes at third year only.
Correct. No, so you are talking about the presentation which Professor Narayan Marathi made, or you are talking about my lecture?
Yes.
No, yes means which one? Are you talking about Professor Narayan Marathi's presentation?
Yes,
or
sir.
Are you
Yes, his presentation.
Oh, okay. So you said that he used certain formulae which may not have been exposed to the student at that time.
Yes, sir.
Professor Marathi, what is your view on that?
I made a 10-minute presentation to introduce the concept to the student, to the faculty members, that instead of when we introduce sampling theorem, the concept of error, what is there and what is the measure whether the sampling is appropriate or not. As of now, we go only whether the sampling theorem is at a later stage also. We never talk about imperfect sampling. What are the effects of imperfect sampling? And in that case, we go for aliasing. So again, that all these and then aliasing distorts the signal. So what is the the imperfect or insufficient sampling? When it is to be explained, it is explained in an abstract manner. So what I think is that by introducing this to students, then by changing the sampling interval, and by introducing the curve, actual signal, reconstructed signal using sample and hold circuit, and then telling them this is the error, and we can we can take a MP4 file which is available, and we can actually it itself is a sampled one, but by reducing the rate of sampling and making students to listen, we can create an example whether this is the method of what we can say error which takes place when sampling rate becomes poorer and poorer. Here the relative error is increasing, that we can show. So this formulae is not an important question. The formula is presented before the faculty audience to make them aware, to give this feel to the students that as we sample, finer details between of variations between intersample intervals are lost. And what I think my major fundamental debatable point is that claiming that the sampling theorem makes them to recover to the fullest extent is something abstract level, and students should be made aware that that is possible only for an infinitely long signal from minus infinity to infinity. In any case, a practical signal which is there for finite duration can never be reconstructed by sampling. It is because that will require infinite rate sampling, and therefore to give them a concept of error which is there in reconstruction, that is the sampling is always lossy, that should be thrust upon, and for that purpose this simple time domain sampling analysis should be presented, is my view.
So Professor Marathi, that is all right, but I think we are jumping too many points here. You see, when you are, you see, I mean, it's like, it's like this. There is this story, of a person who was going to narrate his journey to a city, So, the person was narrating to an audience, and see, he said, well, he started off by saying, I'm going to talk about my journey to so-and-so city and so on. And then immediately after that, he started shouting, how dare you touch me? How dare you do this? You shouldn't be doing this. Step out of my way. Take that bullock out of my way. Now, see, the audience is wondering, where is the bullock and where is the who is the person standing in front of you and who is the person obstructing your way when you're going to city. You see, first you must say city you're going to, what transport you're using, who is it that you're meeting on the way, and what obstacles are coming in your way. And then you can start shouting at the person, then you can enact the scene which you had when you were traveling to a city, isn't it? That's exactly what is happening here. I mean, the student is sitting in front of you, has no idea what you mean by sampling first. And you're telling him that this is an obstacle, this is a problem, this is, this is not a good way to do it, you should put this out of, So you understand my point? I mean, you first tell him that I'm going to whatever, Ratna Park or whatever.
Yes,
no. Then tell him that, when I was going to when I was going to Delhi, then, I found there was a bullock standing in the middle. So I had to move him out of the way. Then the next I came to a roadblock, and, the roadblock was there. So I had to clean the roadblock. And there were so many people who were, standing in my way. I had to tell them to give me a path, right of way and so on. So that's why I started shouting. You see, I'm putting it in very simple language. So what I'm trying to tell you is that before you start enacting the scene that you went through when you are traveling to the city, you must first tell them which city you're traveling to and what you encountered, because of which you had to enact the scene. Isn't it? So here too, before you tell them what is sampling, what is the challenge in sampling, what are the, and then, band limitedness and the sampling theorem comes later. We don't, the student doesn't even know what the sampling theorem is at this moment, isn't it? So, I mean, he doesn't even know there's a theorem about sampling. He doesn't even know what sampling is. So, the reason why I'm mentioning this to all our faculty colleagues here is, very often, you see, we come full with our head is full of knowledge. But, when we are presenting it to a student, we must remember the student is starting afresh. So, it's very important to begin and walk with the student from where he or she is to the point where you want him or her to be. All right. So, yeah, any other comments?
Yes, sir, I have something to say.
Yes, Prema. Yes, Professor Prema.
Actually, I hadn't gone through your sampling videos earlier. This is the first time I was going through, and after seeing that, I have a totally different perspective on sampling. Generally, when we take in the class, we just give us a brief introduction about what is sampling, and then we go to Shannon's theorem, we go to sampling theorem, sampling frequency, and all those. And maybe in 1 or 2 classes, we finish the topic of sampling. And but if I feel that if they are explaining the way you have explained, like how initially take a function and then sample it, and with an a priori information, it is very easy to reconstruct it, and then slowly come to sine wave, sampling the sine wave and reconstructing the concept of Gauss and imposture frequencies. All these are, I think, the very basics of sampling. And I feel that if we start teaching sampling in this way, as you have done, any student can understand it in a much better way than what we explain. And I feel, and I haven't seen this kind of explanation in any of the books also, sir. This is very great, and I'm so fascinated with the way of you have explained the sampling. So I feel like we all should follow that and start teaching sampling in this way.
Thank you so much, Professor Prema. I'm glad that you liked my way of introducing the subject. So do you feel that my first lecture was properly reflected in this presentation? Somehow I feel that it was not.
It was not. And what I feel is, sir, I am going to take the third presentation. And if this would have been taken the concept of the first presentation, there would have been a continuity. But now I feel that I've said that there won't be a continuity in what I'm talking.
So I suggest what you do is, then you could just summarize some points of the first lecture and then incorporate them in your presentation.
Okay, sir.
Will that be okay? So that then there'll be a otherwise that's the reason why I'm worried, because I wanted that subject to develop in that way.
Initially the information, the a priori information, and what happens is that's not there, and all those should be covered before I take my topic. That's what I was.
So I think if you don't mind, maybe I'll request you to, you and the one, anyway, you are in group 2 right now.
I'm in
you're
3,
in group
sir.
3. In 3.
I'm in 3.
So
I'm going to explain. Yes.
So may I then, in fact, then can we request you, since you have gone through the first session lecture also, can you quickly summarize, I know you don't have a presentation ready for
Yes,
this,
sir, I don't
but
have,
would you
but
be
I
able
can.
to, no, but can you quickly
Uh,
summarize the essence of the first lecture in that workshop? Because that, as you said quite rightly, it's critical for the understanding of the subsequent
yes,
development. So I think I would
yes.
request you to do that now, and then when the time comes for your presentation, you can continue
Okay,
with the way you planned. Yeah.
okay, sir. Okay, sir, I can do that quickly.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, I'm from Group 1.
Yes.
Shall I add to Professor Marathi
Yes, yes.
instead of
Maybe, yeah,
Prema,
we'll
madam?
request for Hemangi to add. That's a good idea. Yes, Professor. So then we'll,
Thank you, sir. Sir, actually, from the first lecture, the
yes,
need of samples, like we are all having all the physical signals which are captured by our sensors or
yes,
whatever we are using, those are in continuous time format. So it is very difficult to convert them or use them in the digital circuits, whatever we are implementing in applications. And again, they need a lot of memory, and we cannot use them as it is most of the times. So there is a need to convert them into discrete format.
yeah,
So that's why you have given the example of magnetic tape and audio CD. That is a very good example actually. And that example indicates the at actual when we are recording the audio signal in continuous time format, then whatever the glitches are there or some noise arises that is not present in the audio CD. Although we have lost some data, we are not including every sample. We are taking, we are not including the signal as it is, but we are taking some samples. Then also we are having good clarity in the audio CDs. And that's what the sampling process gives the advantage, that instead of using the continuous time signal as it is, we can represent that signal using some discrete samples of it effectively, and that also reduces the robustness of system and the complexity of the system. Is it good, sir?
yeah. This definitely is relevant, and this would give a down to earth introduction to sampling. Yeah, that's
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir. So that.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good attempt. Professor Prema, would you now like to make a quick
Yes,
summary? Yeah.
I can do
Thank
that.
you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I
Thank
will
you. Thank
just
you.
present my, yes, sir. I can present my screen and I can write something and show, sir.
Yeah, if you can do
Doing
that,
that.
that's fine. Otherwise, even just an oral presentation is okay.
I can do that, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, in the first lecture, what we can see is that the basic concept of sampling. Sampling in the sense, if we have a function, we can take one value of that function and we can call that as a sample for that function. Now, if I take the example of an exponential signal like this, and if I know that the signal function is x of t is equal to e power minus alpha t. It can be, I have taken a decaying exponential. And if I have a sample, say at a value t1, and if I know that this value is x1, then I can, suppose if I have another sample also, if I have two samples for this, but the values of a and alpha are unknown to me. So in this case, I can take two equations, which is x1 is equal to a e power minus alpha t1 and x2 is equal to a e power minus alpha t2. So with these two equations, I can easily find out the values of the unknowns, which are a and alpha. These are two equations, two simultaneous equations, and if I solve these two equations, I can find out the value of a and alpha. So in this way, if you have, so you can say that this x of t is equal to a e power minus alpha t is an a priori information what I have. I have an information which is there with me. That means this has a specific function. This particular curve has a specific function, and the function equation is a e power alpha, say minus alpha t. And if I have this with me, and if I know two samples, say at t1 the value is x1 and T2 the value is x2, then it is very easy for me to solve this and reconstruct the signal back. So just by taking these two values, I can reconstruct the entire signal. So same case with sine also. If I have say equation x of t, sorry.
Yeah.
X of t is equal to a naught cos omega naught t or something. If I have that and if I have two samples, I can easily reconstruct because I have an a priori information. Now, in case if I, this is the basic of the first lecture, that's what I understood. And also suppose if I have a sine wave like this, sometimes if I have a sample at every cycle, if I have only one sample, suppose if I have a sample here and if I have a sample here and sample here, that means my sampling values are only this. This may not result in a sine wave. This can result as a constant wave or it is a step signal. So just by having one value per cycle, I may not be able to get the reconstruct the signal back. So it is very important how many samples per cycle we have, and if I have an a priori information, it will be easier for me to reconstruct a signal from the value. And this is, sir has quoted very good example of a crossword, where in a crossword, you would have some missing letters given. And if there is a clue given, that clue can be considered as a priori information and the missing letters can be taken as a sample. So with the help of missing letters and the clues, we can solve the puzzle or solve the crossword very easily. Suppose if I have only missing letters and if I don't have a clue with me, then it will be very difficult to complete the crossword. So this can be a very good example of this concept. Sir, I think I have made it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Prema. That's a very good presentation. So as Professor Marathe says in the chat, he has presented what he calls a simplification patch to the first lecture. But so Professor Marathe, I would have liked it if you had first discussed this point, which Professor Prema brought out, that sampling and reconstruction is a tussle between a priori information and measurement. You see, in the extreme case, if you know everything about the signal, there is no sampling required. For example, if you know your signal is a constant signal of value 3, there is no sampling required. You know what your signal is. On the other hand, suppose you know your signal is a constant signal, then you require at least one sample. As Professor Prema says, if you know your signal is a decaying exponential, you require two samples from which you can reconstruct. So sampling is a game between a priori information and measurement. This point I thought could have been brought out a little more emphatically, and I feel, as Professor Prema says, this point is often underemphasized in many expositions on sampling, and that's the reason why I'm spending time discussing this point before this audience, because it'd be nice if this perspective is used to begin introduction of sampling. Then the student understands what the challenge of sampling is, more generally than just talking about band limited signals or sine waves. That's a limited context. But sampling is a game. It's a game between a priori information and measurement. See, I often liken sampling to the game of dumb charades. So, you know how dumb charades are played, no? So people make symbols and you're supposed to guess the whole sentence or whatever, the phrase from the gestures or from the signals or from certain, from certain symbols which people make, and they dumb charades, they're not supposed to speak. So it's like this, the signal sitting in front of you is dumb. It doesn't tell you what it is, but it gives you some hints. And you have to figure out the signal. You can think of it like that. You have to figure out the signal. And you have to do it with some measurements. Now, for example, if you know, so when you're playing dumb charade with somebody, if you know this person is now going to talk about, or he's going to expect us to guess a phrase which relates, let us say, to kings and queens. then naturally your whole context gets reduced. Your whole context of search gets reduced. And then you think only about kings and queens, all the symbols that he or she makes. But if you know nothing at all, then of course it's very difficult. In Damsharad, then you have to look at the symbols and start guessing. So you can think of it as a game of dumb charades at some level, So anyway, it's good to make this kind of analogy when you introduce the subject of sampling. Yes, as Professor Himangi says, it may be interesting to give examples like crossword or Sudoku. Yes, in a way, Sudoku is, an indicate, the way Sudoku is an indication of sampling. It's a crossword. Yeah, crossword. Yes, a crossword is also, in a way, an example of sampling. Yes, in crossword, you're given certain a priori information about the word, and you have to reconstruct the word. That's a very good example. I think that's a very good example which Professor Himangi brought out, Sudoku or crossword. In crosswords and Sudoku also, one has certain amount of a priori information, and from the a priori information, the entire reconstruction must proceed based on certain measurements. Of course, measurements is the issue here. What are the measurements? That part would need to be brought out more clearly. The measurements accumulate. So once you fill in one letter, then that becomes a measurement and so on. Isn't it? Or somebody can give you a clue. That's like a measurement. So, in a crossword, that's a good way of looking at it. In a crossword, what is already present, they may have populated some letters, or in Sudoku, they may have populated. Now, in a crossword, they give you clues. So, or they may have already populated some letters somewhere. So, a crossword with some letters populated is like a priori information. And the clue is like so the clue is again like certain a priori information given to you, or you could think of the clue as a measurement. You will have to build that analogy a little more carefully. Anyway, very nice. So, any further comments on this? How do you introduce the subject of sampling to an audience? We should discuss that, because very often that is not really done carefully. Any other comments by any other colleagues?
Sir, we can call it finding unknowns from the knowns.
Yes. What you already have as knowns, use as a priori information, and then based on that venture into the unknown with some measurement. But the critical thing is some knowns, a priori information, and some measurements. So the measurements idea needs to be brought in also.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah, any other comments? All right, very good. So if not, then we'll now go on to the second group and request it to make its presentation.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, all. Myself, Sudha Survase from CG College of Engineering, Pandharpur.
Yes.
I'm a member of Group 2, and the topic is non-uniqueness due to sampling. Yes. Sir, with your permission, I would like to use paper pen. Will that be okay?
Fine. That's fine, yes. But then we must be able to see your paper and pen, right?
So. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely.
Okay. So what we are looking for in lecture 2 is non-uniqueness due to sampling. So in session 1, we have seen about the a priori information and the measurement. Now, what is a priori information? A priori basically is a Latin for the word from the former. So what is from the former is a priori, which is very opposite to posteriori, which we call is knowledge based on the experience or the earlier observations. So what is non-uniqueness comes from? For that we have to understand. We'll take a simple example. Suppose x of t I will take as a exponentially decaying signal. So mathematically I can write this signal as x of t equal to.
Madam, I think you're not sharing the part where you're writing. So that is not visible to everyone.
Is it? Okay, just a second, sir.
I think you're sharing a different tab.
So we'll consider an example of an exponential signal. So I will say x of t is an exponential signal, which I can write mathematically as x of t is equal to a into e raised to minus alpha t. Now we will take two samples or two measurements. Let us consider those at the time t1 and t2. This is the time axis, and I do have some signal of which I will consider two samples. Let the first sample be at time t1, second sample be at time t2. Accordingly, I will say this is the magnitude x of t1, and this point I will say is x of t2. Okay. So if we are able to find x of t1 and x of t2, that is a into x of t1 is nothing but a into e raised to minus alpha t1, and x of t2 is nothing but a times e raised to minus alpha t2. So if we are able to write or able to find x of t1 and x of t2, then we can characterize x of t completely. Of course, here alpha can be positive real and can be negative real. If it is positive real, then it is exponentially growing signal. If it is negative, then we will have exponentially decaying signal. Alpha can also be a complex number. For sake of simplicity, we will consider the real numbers only. So to characterize x of t, we have to fill up what is in between these two and what can be outside these two or what can be elsewhere. So apart from this region, what is there that we should be aware of so that we can characterize the x of t completely. If we don't have a priori information, then what are the possibilities of reconstruction? And here is the problem, that we do have infinite solutions for this. So very well explained by Gadre sir is the example of circuit Sudoku or crossword. Here the rows or column letters are given and we may have blank spaces in between. So we can fill those blank spaces with any letters in the row or word. Any letters means we do have infinite solution, but the thing is we have to arrive at the right word, that is the unique solution. The clues of the crossword are like a priori information with which we can solve the puzzle which is designed very intelligently. So here, if we consider this example, what is the a priori information over here we do have is that the signal is exponential. If signal is exponential, that means I will connect these two samples this way, or else infinite solutions means what? I may connect it by this way, I may connect it by this way, I may have any sort of connection we may have like this, right? So this way we do have infinite solution. But with the use of a priori information, I will consider only for this exponentially decaying signal. So that is what we mean to say. So the problem of interpolation or reconstruction is what is required and what we are able to choose. So whether we are losing some information or we are able to reconstruct a signal, that the point is to be considered. Now mostly we work with sinusoids, and there are wide variety of signals which are having Fourier transform. We can say most of these signals which are not extending infinite time duration, for those signals Fourier transform does exist. So we do have a class of signals which is we frequently use as a sine wave and whose Fourier transform does exist. Now Fourier transform does exist means what? That the signals are comprised of summation of sine waves. So we do have various sine waves. So suppose I do have a signal x of t which is equal to a1 into cos of omega 1t plus phi 1 plus a2 into cos of omega 2t plus phi 2 plus a3 into cos of omega 3t plus phi 3. So now this is a signal x of t which whose Fourier transform does exist, means it can be represented by the summation of sine waves. So this is first one, second one, third one, likewise. Now if we consider the uniform sampling means I will consider the samples at uniform interval of time. So suppose this is 0, I will consider some time interval Ts, here it will be 2 Ts, here it will be 3 Ts, and so on. Likewise, to the negative side, I will have minus 2s, minus 2 Ts, minus 3 Ts, and so on. So here Ts, this is, I will say, is the sampling interval, the interval between the two samples. So now, if I have to sample this continuous signal which is composed of various sine waves, then I will write this signal as x of n into Ts. N may take any value. I will write this signal as A1 into cos of omega 1, and T is nothing but n into Ts, which sample we are taking into account, that is indicated by n, plus phi 1 plus A2 into cos of omega 2 nTs plus phi 2 plus A3 into cos of omega 3 nTs plus phi 3. So these three are known as the constituent sinusoids. So if we will consider the constituent sinusoids, then it may happen that we may lose some of the information. For example, I will consider a sinusoid . And I will consider some samples. Okay. So here the interval between the two samples, this I will say is the sampling interval, which is Ts, and one whole cycle. Let it has time duration T. So this is the point whereby cosine wave begins. So we have considered one of the sine zeros. For sake of simplicity, let us consider that this duration is t equal to 0. So I can write or express this point as a0 into cos of 2 pi by t plus pi by 4. We have taken samples at an interval of pi by 4. So this is what we do have. Now if when we are reconstructing, then this may happen that we may lose some of the information. So you may have signal in this fashion. So here we have the point whereby signal is arrived. It is same. We are interested for this point only, but if you see for the information which we do have is this, and now we have this information. So here is the difference. So losing cycle and arriving at the right edge or the wrong edge is what we have to consider in the proceeding sessions. Thank you. That's all from my side.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Survasi.
Yes.
So Professor Survasi brought out some very important points here, namely, in a sinusoid, if you took two samples, even if you know that there is a sinusoid in between them, there could be many cycles missed between them. That was the point she was bringing out towards the later part of our lecture. And that is what brings about, so you see, in fact, she was trying to explain to you what is the non-uniqueness present when you bring in sampling. And how do you resolve, how do you then make a resolve to remove that non-uniqueness? Is that right? All right, so let's now have observations and comments by other participants on this presentation.
Yes, sir, it was a nice presentation, sir. I can start straight from where she stopped.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
I
It
think
was
we will
very
now
nice.
go on to the third group. Then, if there are no other comments, we can go on to the third group.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Prema from BMS College, Bangalore. I have three more members in my team, Professor Rakesh, Professor Ramar, and Professor Anandi Madam. So what we have decided is, because this is a single concept, so it will be better for one of us to present. So for this presentation, I am going to present, and the next one will be by another person. So all four presentations will be taken care by four.
Very good. That's a very good strategy. Yes, that's a very good strategy.
So I'm going to start the presentation now. Yes. So here I'm going to explain the concept of imposter terms or ghost frequencies and the expression for imposter terms. So I'll start with the sinusoids with some samples, with the same sample, how we can have different sinusoids with the same sample, and then the concept of non-uniqueness in samples and how we can get an expression, mathematical expression for imposter terms. So I'll just start with where Sudha madam stopped. Here it is we know that all the signals can be, or most of the signals can be converted into Fourier transform, and that means if we have some method to reconstruct sinusoidal signals, then it will be very easy for us to reconstruct any signal, because a signal which can be transformed into a Fourier transform, then you can if you reconstruct one signal sinusoidal, you can reconstruct all the sinusoidals and take the sum of it, then you'll get the original signal back. But the effective reconstruction of sinusoidal will be is very challenging, because as we see in the previous presentation, that with the same two samples, we can have many number of sinusoids possible. So we need to address that problem. So if I take one example of a waveform, suppose if I have say this, I can take this red signal as the sinusoid, original sinusoid, and if I take any two samples here, suppose if I'm taking this and this sample, as I can see, I can have another signal which is like this blue color, which can go like this and come here. So that means here within these two samples, I am going to lose one entire cycle. If you see this blue waveform. Similarly, I can have another way. Suppose if I start from here with the same amplitude, like this, I can have another waveform. So in both the situations, I am losing one whole cycle here. So that is the problem, and this can be called as ghost frequencies, because these are the frequencies which are not actual frequency of the original waveform. Now, if I want to represent this mathematically, you can have the original sinusoid signal equation can be x of t is equal to a naught cos omega naught t plus phi naught. This is the original frequency sinusoid what we have, and in case if I have some other frequencies, ghost frequencies, I can have an expression like this: a naught, the amplitude will be same for both a naught and a naught, and then what I have is cos omega kj. Instead of omega naught, I may have another component omega kj into t plus phi kj. So this k denotes the possibilities in this, j denotes the possibilities in which we can have two signals. So in the previous slide I showed, one is going upward and coming back to the next sample, and the blue waveform is coming downward and going to the next. So you can have two possibilities. So that is the k value. It can be either upward or the wrong way. So, and j is that, and k can be any integer, any positive integer. So these are the ghost frequencies which are present in between any two samples. Now if I'm uniformly sampling the signal, substituting t is equal to n into ts, then what I have, instead of x of t, what I have is x of n ts, which can be represented as a naught cos omega n ts plus phi naught. Now with this x of n ts, if I have the ghost frequencies also present in it, then I can add another phase to it. So the non-uniqueness comes from being able to add extra phase to this. This can be plus 2 pi nk or minus 2 pi nk. As I told, k indicates the possibility in which I can have two more Gauss frequencies in it, one going upward and one going downward. So in that way, I can have either plus or minus, and k can be any positive integer. So this plus and minus can be replaced with this j. J is either plus or minus, and k is any positive integer or all positive integers. So this phase is added because of the or taking care of the non-uniqueness which is coming between the two samples. Now, if I'm solving this, suppose if I'm substituting omega naught as 2 pi by T naught, then so I'm substituting here 2 pi by T naught, and if I'm taking 2 pi n and Ts common from these two terms, what I get is A naught cosine of 2 pi nTs into 1 by T naught, because this T naught comes here. So into 1 by T naught plus or minus K by Ts. Now for any sampling condition, the essential condition is that the Ts has to be less than T naught always. Now if in case if K is 1, then what happens? Here we have 1 by T naught minus 1 by Ts will become a negative value. So to avoid that, what we can have is, you can write it as minus of K by Ts minus T naught, because cosine is a even function. You can write this as, so first one is using plus, so that will not be a problem. A naught cos 2 pi nTs 1 by T naught plus K by Ts. Now if I substitute minus here, I have this like this, 1 by T naught minus K by T naught. In case if K is 1, then this will be greater than this. So we can change this, and considering that cosine is an even term, what we have is minus of this. So this also will become minus. So what I have is A naught cos 2 pi nTs into K by Ts minus 1 by T naught minus phi naught. So first term what we have is 1 by T naught plus K by Ts plus phi naught, and the next term what we have is 2 pi nTs into K by Ts minus 1 by T naught minus phi naught. Now by substituting different values of K, we can see that we may be losing either 1 cycle or 2 cycles or 3 cycles for different values of K. Now for plotting this, what I thought is instead of plotting by hand, it will become very clumsy. I wrote a small MATLAB code for this, so I can show that. So here in this code, what I have done is, I have taken, so this is my original signal. Sorry, I cannot write on this. So you can see line number 5, which is x is equal to A naught cos 2 pi nTs by T naught plus pi by 4. So I have taken phi naught as pi by 4 here, and A naught I have taken 5, T naught is 0.002 and Ts is 0.008. So if I plot, I will show you the plots just after showing this program. And then I have written x is the original signal, x1 I have taken plus here 2 pi ns into Ts by T naught plus pi by 4 plus 2 pi n k into 1. So here in this program, I have written k as 1. You can see that in line number 8, in the last one, I have multiplied by 1, which is the value of k. Similarly, on line number 11, I have it minus pi by 4 and minus 2 pi n into 1. So here I have taken k value as 1. If I run this program, I'll get it. So I'll, if you are okay with this program, then I'll go back and show the waveform. So I have plotted the waveform. This is for k is equal to 1.
Yes.
And you can see that this red is the original. So I'll write it here. X is the original, and blue is x1, and yellow is, green is x2. So you can see that x1 is plus k, okay? So plus 2 pi nk. So which will start from here down downward and go up, and where this is the, sorry. So the sampling points are this and this. So you can see that when k is equal to 1, it is going down and going, and so it is almost a cycle. So we are losing one cycle here. But if you are, instead of going downward, if you are going upward, we are not losing one cycle. We are almost losing. You can see that this green line is like this. So it is not losing complete cycle, but we have almost lost one cycle. This is for minus, and this is for plus. Blue is for plus and green is for minus, and for the value of k is equal to 1. Now the same thing, if I draw for k is equal to 2, this is what I get. So my sampling points are, so this is for k is equal to 2. And my sampling points are this, sorry for this, and this. These are the two sampling points. So I can, red is the original signal again. And as you can see, if I'm taking the blue one, which is k is plus value, then I'm losing here more than one cycle, almost 2 cycles. Is it exactly 2 cycles, sir?
Well, in the way you've drawn, but that may not be necessary. You know, so
Okay.
that may not be necessary. So it depends on where your samples are.
Okay, fine. So here I'm not exactly losing 2 cycles, but in anyway it is more than one cycle lost.
Yeah, you're not losing exactly 2 cycles here.
Yes.
No? The way you have drawn it, it's not exactly 2 cycles.
Yeah, and then the green one, it is not as much as the blue one. When you are coming downward, the number of cycles you are losing will always be less than what you go upward. So that is what we can observe from this, and this is for k value is equal to 2. So the sampling k is equal to 3 here. And the sampling points are here and here. You can see that when the k value increases, the number of cycles what we are losing between two samples is increasing. Sir had quoted one question at the end. What happens if we add all the signals, all the 3 signals? So if you add x, x1 and x2, what will happen if you add all these signals? So I had written the code in MATLAB for that also. And this is what we get. If you add all the signals together, so this is red is x1, and sorry, red is x, blue is x1, green is x2, and this large one is total y, which is equal to x plus x1 plus x2. So we can observe one thing here is that at the point of sampling, so I can zoom that and show you. So this is a zoomed version of that. So at the points of sampling, so this is one point of sampling where, and this is another value or point of sampling. So these are the two sampling points. You can see that at the point of sampling, it is constructive. And here also, you can see that at the point of sampling, it is constructive. So the question, what is quoted here is what will happen at the other point, will it become destructive? I think the answer will be given in the next section. Thank you.
Very good, very well presented, Professor Prema, and that brings out the essence of what happens when you sample sinusoids. So as Professor Prema beautifully brought out, the challenge that comes with sampling a sinusoid is that you can be losing cycles in between the samples. And she beautifully brought out both mathematically and graphically, and by adding a MATLAB exercise, which you can also give to your students, how these cycles are lost and how it brings ambiguity. So very well done. And this then leads us to ask what we should do to have a unique reconstruction, isn't it? So let's now have comments, any comments or questions or observations on the presentation. It's very important for all of us to participate in presentations by making observations, by asking questions at the end of the presentation, by making suggestions or comments, or that is in the interest, you know, the whole purpose of this exercise is to build a pedagogical philosophy. For that, all of us have to participate. Of course, I am giving my inputs, but the whole idea is that other colleagues must also do the same. So any further observations or suggestions or comments on Professor Prema's presentation? Professor Ashish, you have to unmute. Yes.
Yes, sir. So I was just trying to. Can all the signals have Fourier transform? This is my question.
No, all signals don't have a Fourier transform. So for an example is a signal which is exponentially growing will not have a Fourier transform. So you know, one definite sufficient condition for a signal to have a Fourier transform is when it is absolutely integrable. So if a signal is absolutely integrable, then you know it definitely has a Fourier transform. Sorry, if it is both absolutely integrable and square integrable. And square integrable. So it belongs to L1 and L2. You know, so signals that are both absolutely integrable and square integrable. That is one class of signals which has a Fourier transform.
Okay, sir.
But of course, there are other peripheral ones, but we don't want to go into. But you know, there are definitely some simple examples, like an exponentially growing signal does not have a Fourier transform. So all signals don't have a Fourier transform. That's why in the second part of this course, we go on to a generalized transformation paradigm, Laplace transform and the Z transform.
You said all exponentially growing signals cannot have a Fourier transform. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, in real domain, I believe no signals can grow exponentially forever.
That is true. That is true.
Then can I make a loose statement that all real signals will have Fourier transform?
Very good. That's a very good question. See, realistic signals are definitely going to have finite energy.
Yes, sir.
No, they're going to have finite energy.
Yes, sir.
Now, in fact, you know, so they belong to what is called L2R in mathematical terms. You know, they have finite energy. So anyway, signals that have finite energy typically have a Fourier transform. You know, typically signals. So in a way, you're right. Signals that we deal with in real life, many signals that we deal with in real life have a Fourier transform simply because they have finite energy. Right? So signals that have finite energy typically have a Fourier transform. You know?
Chirp signaling is an exponentially growing signal, sir.
Yes.
Chirp.
A chirp, no, a chirp is not an exponentially growing signal. No. A chirp is a signal with frequency which varies in a particular way with time, instantaneous frequency. The rate of change of phase is not constant. So, you know, the rate of change of phase may change with time. That's called a chirp signal because it resembles a bird's chirp. You know, some of them resemble a bird's chirp.
Yes.
So chirp signals are not necessarily exponentially growing. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, Professor Velmurugan had a question or had a comment. Yes, Professor Velmurugan, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Madam has explained very well, sir.
Yes.
I have a small doubt in that graph.
Yes.
Madam has shown that when we add all the three signals, we will get a constructive sinusoidal signal. Do we get opposite of that also, sir? That is destructive manner also?
Yes. So you see, in fact, what Madam was trying to explain is that at the points of sampling, when you add all these signals, all these sinusoids, which have the same samples at these points, at the points of sampling, it is obvious that the interference is constructive because all the samples are the same.
Yes.
But what she was trying to explain is that as you add more and more of these sinusoids, other than at the points of sampling, the interference slowly starts becoming destructive. Okay. In fact, she also hinted that in the next lecture, this is going to be proved more formally.
Okay. Thanks.
So now there's a question from Mrs. Jayanti, you know, signum function. Please explain why we are not able to find the Fourier transform directly. See, the signum function, if you look at it, is not really absolutely integrable. In fact, if you write down the Fourier integral for the signum function, you'll see it really doesn't converge. It's an infinite integral which would not strictly converge. But you can bring in impulses and write the Fourier transform. In fact, for a signum function and so on, if you introduce, so when we come to the Laplace transform, you'll see. If you multiply that signum function by a decaying exponential, then you can of course find the Fourier transform of that signum function or a unit step function multiplied by a decaying exponential. Now what you do is, if you want to find the Fourier transform, you make the decay of that exponential slower and slower and see where you are going. That is what that limiting case of the Fourier transform for unit step is. That's why unit step needs to bring in an impulse. So it's a profound thing. To find out the Fourier transform of a step function, unit step, you need to use what is called curation of the contour. So, you need to integrate on the imaginary axis, but you need to curate the singularity there. You need to curate the singularity. You need to encircle the singularity at 0, and then carry out the integral. And then as you encircle the singularity, the encirclement should go closer and closer to the singularity. And you see what you get. So you get that impulse in a Fourier transform. So now Professor Ashish Mal has another question. Yes, Professor Ashish, yes.
Sir, let me, my system got messed up. Anyway, my question is that you have said if the function is exponentially growing, then we cannot have a Fourier transform.
Yes.
In case, let's consider an example. A function is exponentially growing and then probably exponentially decaying by some means or other, and it has finite energy. So whether your statement you approve that statement, you basically consider the function will still remain it will not be Fourier transformable.
No. See, if it is exponentially growing for a finite interval,
yes, sir,
and then it decays, it will have a Fourier transform.
Okay. So I think the finite energy is most important.
Finite energy is a criterion. The moment a signal has finite energy, in fact, most meaningful signals which have finite energy, except for some pathological, otherwise meaningful signals with finite energy have a Fourier transform. And so realistic signals that we come across which have finite energy have a Fourier transform.
I have a second question, sir.
Yes.
What is the difference between the delta function and the step function with reference to Fourier transform?
Yeah. So strictly speaking, an impulse, that is, an impulse or a delta function has a Fourier transform. The Fourier transform is 1.
Yes, sir.
Flat.
Yes, sir.
So, in fact, the way of understanding this is all frequencies need to come together.
Right.
All frequencies need to come together to cancel the function except at the origin. So, what do you want? When you want an impulse, you want constructive interference at the origin and destructive interference everywhere else. So to bring destructive interference everywhere else, all sine waves need to come together with the same amplitude. So then it has constructive interference at the origin, but destructive interference everywhere else. On the other hand, a unit step function, strictly speaking, does not have a Fourier transform, strictly speaking. But you can allow it to have a Fourier transform if you bring in impulses. So you see, the Fourier integral doesn't converge as is for for a unit step function. But what you can cleverly do is make a tiny circle around the point omega equal to 0. So you can visualize the complex plane and the complex and the integral on the imaginary axis, which leads you to the Fourier transform, should exclude the singularity at 0. You encircle the singularity. And then you start reducing that encirclement to almost 0 radius. So what happens is you get, that's why for a unit step you get a Fourier transform of the form 1 by j omega plus an impulse. That plus an impulse comes from this encirclement of the singularity. So strictly speaking, if you don't allow impulses, then the unit step function does not have a Fourier transform. But then if you allow an impulse, then the unit step function would have a Fourier transform. Yes, so that is the point. Now there's a question from Professor Sudha Survase. Can we consider a nuclear reaction where uranium goes with a increase in energy? So it's not, yes, would you like to explain your question?
Yes, sir. So as we all know, the nuclear reaction, we have abundant energy and it goes on increasing, it goes on multiplying. So can we consider it of this as a practical signal whose Fourier transform doesn't exist?
Yes, in a way you can, because if in that situation, if that energy grows without bound and if it ultimately leads to destruction, complete destruction, then that, if you look at that energy graph as a function of time, it would be exponentially growing, and then that would not have a Fourier transform if it lasts forever. An exponentially growing signal that lasts forever does not have a Fourier transform.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have one more question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, you said the delta function has a Fourier transform.
Yes.
Sir, Dirac delta function is, the mathematicians call it, there is a differentiation. There is a discontinuity at the origin.
Yeah. See, for a mathematician, the Dirac delta function or the impulse is actually not a function in the traditional sense. It is a generalized function. They also call it a distribution. They call it a distribution. So you can define what that, let's call it an object. You can explain what the object does under an integral sign. You cannot quote value at a point.
Okay.
So in a Dirac delta, what is happening is you have non-zero area concentrated into infinitesimal length. That's one way to understand it. There is a sudden burst of area. In fact, in the first workshop, we discussed this whole idea of Dirac delta a little more in depth. So, or in the first course. Anyway, but the idea is it encapsulates non-zero area into zero length or infinitesimal length. That's the idea behind a Dirac delta.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
And Professor Ashish has a question. What is the difference between an impulse and pulse with finite width? An impulse encapsulates.
This is with respect to the Fourier transform, actually.
Fourier transform. So you see, in a pulse with finite width, you're not cancelling the function at all points except 0. You're leaving a little interval where the function is not cancelled. So you still require all. See, what is the Fourier transform of a pulse of finite width? It's a sin x by sinc pattern. Remember in the previous workshop, one of the participants beautifully described, how the sinc pattern looks and how it forms. And it was also clearly mentioned that even to get a pulse of finite width, you need to bring in all frequencies, except where there are nulls. But you see, all the frequencies don't have to come with the same amplitude. Unlike the Dirac delta, where all the frequencies need to come with the same amplitude. But here, all the frequencies don't need to come with the same amplitude. But they still need to come together to cancel the function at all points except in that finite width. But here, there is a finite width in which you don't want cancellation. The frequencies come with different amplitudes in the form of a sin x by x envelope.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Yes. Any other questions?
So significance of myself Ananthi, significance of non-ideal sampling, sir. Non-ideal sampling.
Non-ideal sampling is in fact what you would realistically get, isn't it? You're unlikely to get ideal sampling ever. So,
yes, sir.
Practice when you do sampling, whether it is by using an operational amplifier and capacitive circuits and so on, the sampling is going to be non-ideal. And therefore, you need to analyze what is the effect of non-ideal sampling on the on an original, and we are going to do that later on in this course. We are going to do that. My lectures do that, because that is how actual sampling is. You see, the actual sampling is not going to be idealized, isn't it? You need to worry about, if you take an operational amplifier circuit with a capacitor, it's not really going to be idealized sampling. It's going to have a finite width. So it's going to be pulse, very sharp pulses, or it may be a sample and hold, in which case there is a different analysis required. And we are going to be dealing with that in this course. Later on in this course, we'll be dealing with that. Is that fine, Professor Ananthi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions before we proceed to the next presentation? All right. So we'll take one more presentation now, and then we'll break for lunch and then resume at 4. So we'll take one more. So let's have group 4.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to present on the topic addition and multiplication of sinusoids and imposters. So here I am trying to answer the question which Professor Prema has posted, or indirectly Professor Gadre sir had asked. That is, what happens if we add original sinusoidal signal with its imposters. So this lecture is completely containing mathematical derivations which derive and say the answer to the question. Sir, I actually do not know how much of justice I can do with the derivation, because you have explained it nicely. I don't know how I can put all the things here, but I will try my best. And please let me know if I'm going wrong or if I have missed any points.
Sure.
So sir has done in 2 ways. He has actually answered the question in 2 ways by relating 2 things. First thing is, what happens if we add original sinusoid with the imposter. As the previous lecture, they have discussed how we got the original sinusoid and its imposters. We are adding this equation adds the original sinusoid with its imposters. And here we are just replacing some variables with B and C so that we can simplify the equation. And if we simplify the equation, it looks something like this, which is E naught, which is the amplitude, cos of C, where C is replaced with this term. And in bracket, we have 1 plus 2 summation K equal to 1 to N cos of P. And if we further continue this, the second term, which is inside the bracket, can be written in terms of exponential terms. So here we have all the exponential terms where the cos is replaced by the exponential term. And the same way we have to do it for the other exponential term also. And sir had asked few questions over here. What happens? How does the waveform look like? What happens when the samples increase? So if I relate this questions to what Professor Prema Madam has explained by simulation, we have seen that when we add original sinusoid with the imposter, we have actually here sine by sine term and an exponential term. So we will actually have a higher amplitude at the sample, and we will have lower amplitude where we are not taking any samples. So at a particular sample, we have higher magnitude. So if we add and if we plot this, we will have a sine kind of waveform with higher amplitude at the point where we are taking samples. And if we increase the number of n or the number of samples, we will have more number of that kind of sinc function, I can say, which has higher amplitude at the point where the samples are taken. So this is one understanding which we can understand, that when we add the original sinusoid with imposters, we have actually kind of sine or higher amplitude kind of pulses at the samples. Now the same thing is answered in another way. What happens if we multiply the original signal with a train of very narrow pulses with unit height? So here we have the original signal, which is the sinusoidal signal, and here we have pulses of very narrow width, and all other values are neglected. So if we multiply this, what is going to happen? We will see this again in two ways. In the first way, sir has taken the Fourier series expansion of the train of pulses, and the Fourier series expansion, if you see, the train of pulses is actually again a sinc function, which is having a higher amplitude at a particular sample. So here we'll have a higher magnitude sinc, and here again we'll have a higher magnitude sinc. If we add all those, we will have sinks at all these samples. That is because you can see here as delta tends to 0, it has higher magnitude, and at all other samples we will have lower magnitude. Now the same thing is done in another way, where sir has done it using complex Fourier expansion for the same train of impulses. And here also we will see that we have the same kind of expression where we can represent this as cos, which again we can represent it in terms of exponential term, and which will look the same as what it was derived in the earlier way also. If I club it together, sir had done what happens when the original sinusoid is added with imposters. So when we add it, we will get a sine of a higher magnitude at the sample and with lower magnitude at other points. Similarly, if we multiply the original signal with the train of very narrow pulses, also we are going to get a similar function, but in the form of sinc function. And in terms of Fourier expansion also, we are going to get a similar function. So what sir is trying to conclude by all this derivation is, by bringing all these imposter sinusoids together with the original, it amounts to multiplying the original sinusoid with the uniform train of impulses. Because the results of the first one and the second one is same, so in turn we can relate that by bringing all the sinusoids together with the imposters is equivalent to multiplying the original sinusoid with the uniform train of impulses. And also we can say that since other values are neglected other than the value at the sample, sir has also concluded that when we add all the imposters with the original, we have constructive interference at the sampling instance. This is also shown in simulation by Professor Prema Madam, and have a destructive interference elsewhere because the curve vanishes elsewhere. So this is the derivation which Professor Gadre sir has done. And sir, I really don't know how much of justice I have done to this, but I actually want you to explain all this, at least two methods, give some more inputs to any two methods, sir.
Okay.
For this method, I think this is actually a kind of sinc function or a sine function which has higher magnitude. So the other magnitudes are neglected.
So Professor Pai, what you can do is you can just keep that slide on. I will comment on that slide. Yes. So
yes, sir.
Slide on. Now, if you look at this slide, you know, which Professor Namrata Pai is very nicely prepared, you have a second term there, cos 2 pi by Ts kt, isn't it? Summed over k going from 1 to n. Now, you know,
yes.
The question is, how will you make such a summation? So, how do you do such a summation? Now, if you break the cosine into two exponentials, as you have done there, you know, on the side, isn't it? Then what you, well, you know, in general, cos theta can be written as e raised to the power j theta plus e raised to the power minus j theta by 2. Is that right, Professor Namrata?
Yes, sir. And this is only for first exponential term.
Yes, but you know, for each of the cosines, you can write two such exponentials.
Yes.
And therefore, you will have two streams of exponentials, one coming with the positive exponential and the other with the negative one.
Yes.
Is that right? So you have two streams of exponentials.
Yes.
Now these two streams of exponentials can be added by using the geometric progression rule. That forms a geometric progression. You see,
Yes.
because of the form e raised to the power minus j 2 pi by ts times kt. So, you know, since it is e raised to the power minus j 2 pi by s times 2 pi by ts times kt, you can essentially think of it, you can think of e raised to the power minus j 2 pi by ts into t as the common ratio. And
Yes.
you know, so you have a geometric progression then. It's very easy to add a geometric progression, finite geometric progression. That is the idea used in summary.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. So does this lead with a higher amplitude at the sample and lower amplitude elsewhere?
Yes. So
because
you see,
of
when
the
you
sign
add these, if you write down the geometric progression sum, you will see that actually it starts resembling a sin x by x kind of pattern. That's what is being shown there.
Yes.
You know, so you can, in fact, but you know, this you can only understand by actually writing down the sum of the geometric progression. So one should write down. That's why, you know, I have insisted in this lecture that people work with me, take a pen and paper and work with me there. You know, you have to work out the geometric progression sum, and then you will see how the geometric progression sum starts becoming constructive at the points of sampling and destructive at all other points.
Yes.
So in fact, Professor Namrata has beautifully summarized this lecture, and she has brought out the important steps involved in summing up all these sinusoids that have identical values at the points of sampling. And in fact, then if you, but here in this lecture, you must encourage the student to actually work with you, work out the steps with you.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is not possible to understand the nuances.
Yes, because this has lot of equations.
Yes. No, also, you know,
Yes.
unless the student works out the steps with you, he or she will not understand the nuances of this.
Yes.
So very often in this subject, this is the point in a subject where the student needs to work out with you. There's no option.
Yes.
You cannot be lazy. There is no, you know, there is, I remember I keep telling, there is the famous story of a prince, you know, who was being taught mathematics by his mathematics teacher. So, you know, at some point, the prince had to learn what is effectively a difficult concept in mathematics. And, you know, the prince would have to understand that concept by working through a proof. So, you know, the mathematics teacher told him that, you know, you will have to work through this proof to understand this concept. The prince said, see, you are my mathematics teacher, and if you are telling me, I can just believe you. But, you know, the mathematics teacher told him, see, you are a prince, you are learning mathematics, but there is no difference between a prince learning mathematics and any ordinary citizen. There is no royal road to knowledge. You have to work through the steps to understand the proof, whether you are a prince or whether you are a commoner. So there is a saying, you know, there's a saying, there is no royal road to knowledge. That applies in these situations. You know, there is no royal road to, yes, Professor Nandita says Euclid, yes. I think, was it Euclid who said that? Yeah, I can't recall. It's probably, yeah, might be true. There is no royal road to knowledge. You know, and you know, and one has to work through the proof to understand certain things. This is one of those instances. Very good. So Professor Namrata has very beautifully brought out how there is constructive interference, how the steps need to be worked out for constructive interference, the points of sampling, and destructive interference at other points. And now we have gone a little past our closing time for the session. So we'll now close this session and we'll reconvene at 4 p.m. today as planned, when we will continue with group. Now, after group 4, I think we are going to have group 7. Is that right? Group 7 is going to present lecture 5. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. So we will have group 7 present lecture 5 as we reconvene at 4 p.m. So we'll conclude this session now.